Naomi Carter thought she was marrying the man of her dreams, but on her wedding night she uncovered a chilling truth. The man she loved wasn't just cold, he was dangerous. As secrets unraveled, she had to make an impossible choice: stay trapped in a life of control and manipulation, or risk everything to escape. What followed was a fight for freedom, survival, and reclaiming her power. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe. More shocking stories are coming soon. Naomi Carter stood before the full-length mirror, her reflection illuminated by the golden glow of the vanity lights. The wedding dress hugged her curves like a second skin, its ivory silk cascading to the floor in delicate ripples. It was perfect. At least, that's what everyone kept telling her. A custom-made gown designed to complement the grandiosity of her wedding day, a union between her and Damien Hargrove, heir to one of the wealthiest families in the city. She exhaled slowly, pressing her hands against the smooth fabric over her stomach, as if trying to quiet the unease twisting inside her. This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. Instead, her chest felt tight, and her skin prickled with a foreboding she couldn't shake. Behind her, Layla's voice broke through the silence. "You're glowing," her best friend said, stepping forward with a playful grin and 2 glasses of champagne in hand. Naomi forced a smile. "I don't feel like I'm glowing." Layla arched a brow, handing over a glass. "Cold feet?" Naomi hesitated. It was more than that. The nagging discomfort had started weeks ago, a whisper at the back of her mind growing louder with each passing day. At first, she had dismissed it as stress, the overwhelming nature of planning a wedding of this scale. But now, standing here in the bridal suite of the Hargrove estate, they were screaming. Layla studied her, sharp eyes scanning Naomi's expression. "You know, it's okay if—" A knock at the door interrupted them. Before Naomi could answer, the door creaked open and Damien's mother, Vivian Hargrove, stepped inside, moving with the practiced elegance of a woman who had commanded attention her entire life. "Naomi," Vivian said smoothly, her gaze sweeping over the dress with a critical glint. "Stunning. I suppose we made the right choice after all." The emphasis on "we" wasn't lost on Naomi. The dress hadn't been her choice. Like most things about this wedding, it had been dictated by Vivian. Under the guise of tradition, of course. A Hargrove wedding had to meet certain expectations, ones Naomi was barely allowed to influence. Vivian's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Everything is set. The guests have arrived and the ceremony will begin in 20 minutes. You should start making your way downstairs soon." Naomi nodded, but before she could thank her, Vivian leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "And do try to carry yourself with grace, dear. There are a lot of eyes on you today." Naomi stiffened. The message was clear. "Don't embarrass us." Vivian straightened, offering one last lingering glance before gliding out the door. Layla scoffed as soon as she was gone. "I swear, that woman gives me chills. What is her problem?" Naomi exhaled. "She doesn't think I belong here." Layla frowned. "You're marrying Damien, not his family." That was what Naomi had told herself at the beginning. But Damien's family wasn't just a part of his life. They were intertwined in every aspect of it. His mother had made it clear from day one that Naomi was an outsider. She wasn't Hargrove material. She wasn't from the right background, the right social circles. She hadn't attended the prestigious boarding schools, the elite universities. She was different, and the weight of that difference felt crushing. Layla reached out, squeezing Naomi's hand. "Are you sure about this?" Before Naomi could answer, another knock sounded, this time softer. The door cracked open just enough for her mother to step in, her warm, familiar presence filling the room. "You look beautiful," her mother whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Naomi felt her throat tighten. "Thanks, Mom." Her mother stepped closer, adjusting the neckline of the dress as she had done since Naomi was a child, a touch of reassurance, of protection. Then her eyes locked onto Naomi's, searching. "You don't have to do this if you don't want to." Naomi swallowed. "I love him." Her mother nodded, but her expression remained unreadable. Love isn't always enough. It was the same warning she had given months ago, when Naomi first told her she was engaged to Damien. Her father had echoed the sentiment in his own way. "Watch how he handles pressure," he had said. "Pay attention to how he defends you when it matters." Naomi had brushed it off at the time, confident in Damien's love. He had always been charming, always known the right things to say. He had dismissed his mother's disapproval as unimportant, told Naomi that once they were married, everything would settle. But lately he had been different. The late-night phone calls, the whispered conversations, the way he had grown more irritable, more distant whenever Naomi voiced her concerns about his mother's interference. "You're overthinking it," he had told her last week when she confronted him about a seating arrangement that had suddenly changed without her input. "She's just excited, give her some grace." But it wasn't excitement. It was control. Naomi closed her eyes, inhaling deeply. When she opened them, her mother was still watching her. "No matter what happens today," her mother said softly, "don't forget who you are." Naomi nodded, the words settling deep inside her. Another knock at the door. This time it was one of the event coordinators. "It's time." Layla handed Naomi her bouquet. "Let's do this." Naomi forced a smile, willing confidence into her voice. "Yeah." But as she stepped out of the bridal suite and into the grand hallway leading to the garden ceremony, her heart pounded with an unfamiliar warning. Something was wrong. She just didn't know what yet. The late afternoon sun bathed the estate's garden in a golden glow, its light filtering through the ancient oak trees that towered over the ceremony. Twinkling fairy lights were draped across the branches, casting an ethereal shimmer over the rows of white chairs, the perfectly arranged floral arches, the marble fountains that gurgled softly in the background. It was picturesque, like something out of a luxury bridal magazine. Yet as Naomi stood at the entrance of the aisle, her arm linked with her father's, she felt no warmth from it, only a quiet, creeping unease. She took a breath, steadying herself. The whispers had already started. She could hear them. Hushed voices rippling through the crowd, murmuring not so subtle observation. "She looks stunning," someone said, but the way they said it made Naomi's stomach tighten. It was the tone, the slight edge of surprise. "Exotic choice," another voice murmured. "Lower, but not low enough. She really cleans up well." Her father's grip on her arm tightened ever so slightly, as if he had heard the words too. A silent reassurance, a reminder that she wasn't alone. Naomi swallowed hard and lifted her chin. This was her wedding. They could whisper all they wanted. At the altar, Damien stood waiting, a tailored black suit fitting him perfectly, his expression unreadable. He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Something about the way he was standing, stiff, controlled, made her hesitate. She forced herself forward. Step by step, past the watchful stares of his family, past the shallow smiles of guests she barely knew. When she finally reached Damien, he extended his hand, and she placed hers in his grasp. His fingers felt cool against her skin. "You're beautiful," he whispered, but there was a tension in his voice, like he was forcing the words through clenched teeth. Naomi barely had a moment to process it before the officiant began the ceremony. The words blurred together, a script she had once imagined herself fully present for, but now only barely followed. Damien's grip on her hand felt firm, almost too firm, as if he were holding on for something more than affection. And then there was his mother, Vivian, sitting in the front row, her expression as unreadable as ever, except for the slight knowing arch of her brow every time Naomi glanced her way. She knew something. Naomi could feel it. When it was time for their vows, Damien's voice faltered for half a second before he recovered, reciting the words with polished ease. He smiled in the right places, squeezed Naomi's hands at the right moments, but his tone was rehearsed, hollow. The guests clapped as the officiant pronounced them husband and wife. Damien leaned in for the kiss, but it was brief, too brief. A brush of lips, then he was already turning toward the audience, his grip tightening around Naomi's fingers as if to silently command her to follow. "You're doing great," he murmured as they walked back down the aisle together, but the words sounded forced, like he was trying to convince himself more than her. The unease in Naomi's stomach grew. By the time they reached the reception hall, the whispers had turned to full-fledged conversations. Naomi could feel them as she moved through the crowd, eyes lingering too long, polite smiles masking barely concealed judgment. The grand ballroom was decorated in opulence. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling, massive floral arrangements stood atop tables lined with silk linens, and a string quartet played softly in the background. Everything about it was breathtaking, and yet Naomi felt like an outsider looking in. Her family, seated in a small section near the back, stood out amongst the sea of Damien's wealthy guests. They huddled together, exchanging quiet glances as if sensing the imbalance in the room. "You must feel so lucky," a woman Naomi had never met before said, appearing at her side with a glass of champagne in hand. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "This is quite the upgrade for you." Naomi stiffened, her fingers tightening around the stem of her own untouched glass. "Excuse me." "Oh, I just mean," the woman waved a hand, laughing lightly. "Well, you know how different your worlds are, but love finds a way, doesn't it?" Before Naomi could respond, Damien appeared at her side, wrapping an arm around her waist. "Enjoying yourself?" he asked, pressing a quick kiss to her temple. A public display meant more for the guests than for her. Naomi glanced at the woman, but she was already turning away, slipping effortlessly back into a conversation with another guest. Instead of answering, Naomi whispered, "Did you hear what she just said?" Damien sighed, his grip around her waist tightening. "Naomi, not tonight." Her pulse quickened. "Not tonight? Someone just suggested I should be grateful to be here." Damien let out a dry chuckle, shaking his head. "You're overthinking things again." The same words, the same dismissal. Naomi clenched her jaw but said nothing. Dinner was served, and as Naomi sat beside Damien at the long, decorated table, she felt more like an ornament than a bride. The speeches began. Damien's best man grinning as he told a series of wild bachelor party stories that made Damien smirk and roll his eyes. Then Leela, her voice warm and full of emotion as she spoke about love, resilience, and partnership. But the contrast between the two speeches only made the divide in the room feel wider. When Naomi glanced at Damien, his expression was unreadable again. His mother, however, was not. Vivian leaned in, whispering something in his ear. Whatever she said made his jaw tighten. "Everything okay?" Naomi asked quietly. Damien turned back to her with a brittle smile. "Fine." but his hand, resting on the table beside hers, felt heavy. As the evening went on, Damien became increasingly distant. He kept checking his phone, disappearing for stretches of time, leaving Naomi to navigate a sea of strangers who barely acknowledged her, unless it was to make another backhanded comment. She sought out her parents, longing for familiarity, but when she finally reached them, her father's expression was unreadable, his gaze flicking between Naomi and the rest of the room. "You let us know if you need anything," he said, voice low but firm. Naomi hesitated. "It's just a lot." Her mother reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "We're proud of you," she said softly, "but don't lose yourself trying to fit where you aren't wanted." Naomi felt the words like a weight in her chest. She swallowed and forced a smile. Before she could respond, Damien reappeared. "Babe," he said, placing a hand on the small of her back. "We should make the rounds." Her parents exchanged a glance, but said nothing. Naomi hesitated, then nodded, letting Damien steer her away from them. But as they moved through the crowd, something inside her shifted. The weight in her chest didn't ease. It deepened. And as she caught sight of Vivian across the room, watching her with the same unreadable expression she had worn all night, Naomi suddenly had the terrible realization that maybe she had made a mistake. Maybe she had made a terrible mistake. The laughter around Naomi felt distant, muffled beneath the hum of her own thoughts. The reception was in full swing, guests dancing beneath the grand chandeliers, glasses clinking in celebratory toasts, voices blending together in an indistinct murmur of polite conversation and hushed gossip. And yet, Naomi felt like she was standing outside of it all, watching a performance unfold in which she was little more than a prop. She had barely touched her dinner. The perfectly plated filet mignon sat in front of her, untouched, cooling as she pushed the asparagus around the plate with the edge of her fork. Damien, on the other hand, was laughing at something his best man had said, his easy, charming grin back in place as though nothing had happened, as though he hadn't spent most of the evening brushing her off, as though he hadn't just disappeared for another whispered conversation with his mother. Naomi took a sip of water, forcing herself to focus, to breathe. But the unease in her stomach refused to settle. She glanced across the ballroom at her parents' table, at the quiet way her father observed everything, the way her mother's lips pressed into a thin line whenever she glanced at Damien's side of the room. They felt it too. The divide. The tension beneath the surface. A sharp burst of laughter to her right caught her attention. One of Damien's aunts, a woman in a diamond necklace that gleamed like a noose around her throat, was speaking in hushed but animated tones to a group of guests. Naomi barely caught the words before they disappeared into another swirl of conversation. "She looks good, I'll admit," the woman was saying, voice tinged with condescension. "I suppose it's refreshing that Damien was willing to broaden his horizons?" Naomi's grip on her fork tightened. "I'm sure it must be quite the change for her," another guest mused, swirling their wine. "This lifestyle, this level of refinement." Naomi turned away before she could hear more. Her skin burned, not just with embarrassment, but with something deeper, something hotter. Fury. She took a breath. Maybe she was overreacting. Maybe she was imagining the way they spoke about her like she was an exotic pet Damien had picked up from another world. Or maybe, she thought bitterly, she wasn't imagining anything at all. A hand landed on her shoulder. "Damien, come dance with me," he said, his voice smooth, his smile tight. Naomi hesitated. The last thing she wanted was to be the center of attention on that dance floor, to have every pair of eyes in the room dissecting the way she moved, the way she fit, or didn't fit, into the life Damien had built around himself. "I'm fine here," she murmured. Damien's grip on her shoulder didn't loosen. "Naomi," he said under his breath, "don't make a scene." She looked at him then, really looked at him. The forced ease of his expression, the flicker of impatience in his eyes, the way he seemed more concerned about optics than how she actually felt. So she let him lead her to the dance floor. The music was slow, elegant. Damien's hands found her waist, hers rested on his shoulders, but there was no warmth between them, just the weight of everything left unsaid. "You've been quiet," he noted, his breath warm against her cheek. "I've had a lot to think about," Naomi replied. Damien exhaled sharply. "Naomi, this is our wedding day. Can we not do this right now?" She tensed. "Do what?" "This," he muttered, finding reasons to be upset, reading into things, picking apart every little— "I'm not picking apart anything," she interrupted, her voice low but firm. "I'm just noticing what's in front of me." Damien's jaw tightened. "What's in front of you is a beautiful life, Naomi. One that I have given you." She stared at him. "Given me?" "That's not what I meant," he said quickly, but the words had already settled between them like a chasm. Naomi pulled back slightly, her feet slowing. "What did you mean, then?" Damien looked away, scanning the crowd as though searching for an escape from this conversation. His gaze landed on his mother, standing at the edge of the ballroom, watching them. Watching her. And then Naomi saw it. Vivian gave the smallest shake of her head. Damien's grip tightened ever so slightly on Naomi's waist, before he let her go. "Forget it," he muttered. He turned away before she could respond, weaving back through the crowd, leaving Naomi standing in the middle of the dance floor, alone. The heat of the moment turned to something colder, something sinking and dreadful. She didn't follow him. Instead, she moved toward the terrace doors, needing air, needing space. The night breeze was crisp against her skin as she stepped outside. The city stretched beyond the estate, its skyline glowing against the darkened sky, distant and unfamiliar. She placed her hands on the railing, inhaling deeply. "You're doing better than I expected." Naomi turned sharply. "Vivian." The older woman stood near the terrace entrance, perfectly poised, a champagne flute in hand. Naomi straightened. "Better than you expected?" she repeated, keeping her voice even. Vivian took a slow sip of her drink. "Most women in your position would be overwhelmed by now. The pressure, the attention. But you're holding up." She smiled, but there was nothing kind about it. "For now." Naomi felt her nails dig into the cool stone railing. "Is there a reason you followed me out here, Vivian?" Vivian chuckled. "No need to be so defensive, dear. I simply wanted to see for myself how well you're adjusting." "I'm not adjusting to anything," Naomi said sharply. "I'm just living my life." Vivian tilted her head. "Are you?" Naomi narrowed her eyes. "You may think this marriage is about love," Vivian continued, swirling the champagne in her glass. "But love is a fleeting thing, don't you think? A momentary indulgence, a pleasant distraction. What truly lasts, Naomi, is power, status, the ability to shape the world around you rather than be shaped by it." She met Naomi's gaze, something sharp glinting in her eyes. "My son understands that. Do you?" Naomi felt something cold creep along her spine. Vivian leaned in slightly, voice dropping just above a whisper. "You should be careful, dear. Damien has expectations. This family has expectations. I would hate for you to disappoint him." Naomi inhaled sharply, every nerve in her body screaming at her to walk away, to turn her back on this conversation and never look back. Instead, she smiled, cool, unshaken. Vivian wanted to rattle her? Fine, but Naomi wouldn't give her the satisfaction. Funny, Naomi mused. I was just about to say the same thing to you. For the first time, a flicker of something unreadable passed through Vivian's expression. Naomi turned, heading back inside, leaving the older woman standing alone on the terrace. But as Naomi walked through the ballroom, through the glimmering lights and the well-dressed guests and the sparkling facade of it all, a single thought clawed its way to the forefront of her mind. She had just stepped into something far more dangerous than she had ever realized, and she had no idea how to get out. Naomi's heels clicked against the marble floors of the estate as she moved back inside, her skin still prickling from the conversation with Vivian. The air in the ballroom felt heavier now, the walls pressing in, the chandeliers above casting a golden light that felt almost suffocating. She scanned the room for Damien, but he was nowhere to be seen. Her chest tightened. Something was wrong. She had felt it all night, the tension, the unease, the whispers that followed her every move. But it wasn't until now, standing alone in the middle of the celebration meant to be her wedding reception, that she realized just how deeply she had miscalculated. She wasn't in control here, and she wasn't safe. Leela appeared beside her, her expression tight with concern. You okay? Naomi exhaled slowly, trying to steady herself. I don't know. Layla followed her gaze, scanning the ballroom. Where's Damien? That's what I'm trying to figure out. Naomi's fingers curled around the fabric of her dress. He's been disappearing all night, talking to his mother, taking calls, and when I confronted him earlier, She hesitated, hearing the words in her own head before she said them aloud. He let her go. Not just physically, but emotionally. She had felt it in the way his grip loosened, in the way his attention drifted somewhere else, somewhere more important. Layla frowned. What happened? Before Naomi could answer, movement near the side of the room caught her eye. Damien. He was stepping through a side door leading toward the back corridors of the estate, his posture stiff, his jaw tight. And he wasn't alone. Vivian was with him. Their heads were bent close together, voices low and urgent. Naomi's stomach twisted. Something's going on, she murmured. Layla followed her gaze. Do you want to find out what? Naomi hesitated only a moment before nodding. They slipped through the ballroom unnoticed, weaving between groups of guests, careful not to draw attention. The music, the laughter, the clinking of glasses. It all faded as Naomi pushed through the door after Damien and Vivian, stepping into the dimly lit corridor beyond. The hallway was silent except for the muffled sound of voices echoing further down. Naomi moved carefully, the train of her dress brushing against the polished floors as she followed the sound. Vivian's voice came first, sharp and unwavering. This is spiraling, Damien. She's asking too many questions. Naomi's breath caught. Damien sighed, his tone edged with frustration. She's not going to drop it. She needs to. Vivian's voice was colder now. And you need to make sure of it. Naomi pressed herself against the wall, her heartbeat hammering in her ears. Do you think I don't see what's happening? Vivian continued, her words dripping with disdain. She doesn't belong here, Damien. She never did. And now she's beginning to understand that. Naomi's fingers curled into fists. A long pause. Then Damien's voice, quiet but firm. She won't leave. Vivian let out a soft, humorless laugh. Of course she won't. Not yet. Naomi's stomach turned. She needed to get out of there, now. Turning on her heel, she moved back toward the ballroom, her mind racing. She had to leave. She had to get away from all of this. But just as she reached for the door handle, a hand caught her wrist. She gasped, spinning around, only to find Damien standing there, his grip tightening around her arm. "What are you doing back here?" he asked, voice low, unreadable. Naomi's pulse pounded. "Looking for you." His gaze flicked toward the ballroom doors, then back to her. "You shouldn't be wandering around alone." The words sent a chill down her spine. She yanked her arm back, stepping away from him. What was that conversation about? Damien's expression darkened. "What conversation?" "Your mother." Naomi's voice steadied, even as fear coiled in her chest. "I heard everything, Damien." Vivian leaned in slightly, voice dropping just above a whisper. "You should be careful, dear. Damien has expectations. This family has expectations. I would hate for you to disappoint him." Naomi inhaled sharply, every nerve in her body screaming at her to walk away, to turn her back on this conversation and never look back. Instead, she smiled, cool, unshaken. Vivian wanted to rattle her? Fine, but Naomi wouldn't give her the satisfaction. "Funny," Naomi mused. "I was just about to say the same thing to you." For the first time, a flicker of something unreadable passed through Vivian's expression. Naomi turned, heading back inside, leaving the older woman standing alone on the terrace. But as Naomi walked through the ballroom, through the glimmering lights and the well-dressed guests and the sparkling facade of it all, a single thought clawed its way to the forefront of her mind. She had just stepped into something far more dangerous than she had ever realized, and she had no idea how to get out. Naomi's heels clicked against the marble floors of the estate as she moved back inside, her skin still prickling from the conversation with Vivian. The air in the ballroom felt heavier now, the walls pressing in, the chandeliers above casting a golden light that felt almost suffocating. She scanned the room for Damien, but he was nowhere to be seen. Her chest tightened. Something was wrong. She had felt it all night, the tension, the unease, the whispers that followed her every move. But it wasn't until now, standing alone in the middle of the celebration meant to be her wedding reception, that she realized just how deeply she had miscalculated. She wasn't in control here, and she wasn't safe. Layla appeared beside her, her expression tight with concern. "You okay?" Naomi exhaled slowly, trying to steady herself. "I don't know." Layla followed her gaze, scanning the ballroom. "Where's Damien?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out." Naomi's fingers curled around the fabric of her dress. "He's been disappearing all night, talking to his mother, taking calls, and when I confronted him earlier, She hesitated, hearing the words in her own head before she said them aloud. He let her go, not just physically, but emotionally. She had felt it in the way his grip loosened, in the way his attention drifted somewhere else, somewhere more important. Layla frowned. "What happened?" Before Naomi could answer, movement near the side of the room caught her eye. Damien. He was stepping through a side door leading toward the back corridors of the estate, his posture stiff, his jaw tight. And he wasn't alone. Vivian was with him. Their heads were bent close together, voices low and urgent. Naomi's stomach twisted. "Something's going on," she murmured. Leela followed her gaze. "Do you want to find out what?" Naomi hesitated only a moment before nodding. They slipped through the ballroom unnoticed, weaving between groups of guests, careful not to draw attention. The music, the laughter, the clinking of glasses, it all faded as Naomi pushed through the door after Damien and Vivian, stepping into the dimly lit corridor beyond. The hallway was silent except for the muffled sound of voices echoing further down. Naomi moved carefully, the train of her dress brushing against the polished floors as she followed the sound. Vivian's voice came first, sharp and unwavering. "This is spiraling, Damien. She's asking too many questions." Naomi's breath caught. Damien sighed, his tone edged with frustration. "She's not going to drop it." "She needs to." Vivian's voice was colder now. "And you need to make sure of it." Naomi pressed herself against the wall, her heartbeat hammering in her ears. "Do you think I don't see what's happening?" Vivian continued, her words dripping with disdain. "She doesn't belong here, Damien. She never did. And now, she's beginning to understand that." Naomi's fingers curled into fists. A long pause, then Damien's voice, quiet but firm. "She won't leave." Vivian let out a soft, humorless laugh. "Of course she won't. Not yet." Naomi's stomach turned. She needed to get out of there, now. Turning on her heel, she moved back toward the ballroom, her mind racing. She had to leave. She had to get away from all of this. But just as she reached for the door handle, a hand caught her wrist. She gasped, spinning around, only to find Damien standing there, his grip tightening around her arm. "What are you doing back here?" he asked, voice low, unreadable. Naomi's pulse pounded. "Looking for you." His gaze flicked toward the ballroom doors, then back to her. "You shouldn't be wandering around alone." The words sent a chill down her spine. She yanked her arm back, stepping away from him. What was that conversation about? Damien's expression darkened. "What conversation?" "With your mother." Naomi's voice steadied, even as fear coiled in her chest. "I heard everything, Damien." Something flickered across his face. Something dangerous. "You don't understand," he said carefully. "Then explain it to me." He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "Naomi, this isn't—" The door behind him opened. Vivian stepped out. The moment she saw Naomi, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Ah," she tilted her head. "I see you've been eavesdropping." Naomi ignored the way her heart clenched. "I want to leave." Vivian's smile was slow, condescending. "You're already married, dear." "There's nothing to leave." Panic flared in Naomi's chest. She turned to Damien. "Let me go." Damien's hesitation was brief. But it was there, and that was all the confirmation Naomi needed. He wasn't on her side. Not anymore. She turned and shoved the ballroom doors open, stepping back into the glow of the chandeliers, the laughter, the music. Layla was already waiting near the dance floor, her expression tight with worry. "Naomi?" Naomi reached her, grabbing her hand. "We have to go. Now." Layla barely had time to nod before Damien's voice rang out behind them. "Naomi?" The ballroom went silent. All eyes turned to them. Damien's expression was unreadable as he stepped forward, his hands at his sides, his gaze locking onto Naomi's. "You're not leaving." It wasn't a question. It was a command. The air in the room shifted, the weight of the moment pressed down on Naomi's chest. But she forced herself to stand tall, to lift her chin, to meet his gaze without fear. "Yes," she said, voice clear, unwavering. "I am." A muscle in Damien's jaw ticked. Then, before anyone could react, he reached for the champagne flute on the table beside him and threw it. The glass shattered against the marble floor, shards skidding across the ballroom. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Naomi didn't flinch. She had seen what she needed to see. Damien wasn't just cold. He wasn't just distant. He was dangerous. For a moment, the entire room held its breath. Then, Naomi turned, lifting her dress, and walked out. She didn't run. She didn't need to, because she wasn't afraid anymore. She was done. With him, with his family, with all of it. And as the ballroom doors shut behind her, the only thing she felt was relief. Naomi's heels echoed against the marble floor as she strode through the grand hallway of the Hargrove estate, her wedding dress flowing behind her like a ghost of the life she had nearly condemned herself to. The night air from the open terrace doors hit her skin, sharp and cold, but she barely felt it over the heat burning in her chest. Her heart pounded. Her breath came too fast, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Not now. Not when she had finally seen the truth. When Damien had proven, without a shadow of a doubt, that he was exactly who she feared he was. She had spent months convincing herself that she had been imagining it, that she was being too sensitive, too paranoid. That the way his mother looked at her, the way his family spoke about her, the way Damien dismissed her concerns, none of it meant what she thought it did. But she had been right all along. And now she had to get out. The doors at the far end of the hallway loomed ahead. Her escape, her salvation. But just as she reached for the handle, a voice sliced through the silence behind her. Naomi? She froze, every muscle in her body locking in place. Damien. His voice was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that sent a shiver down her spine. Slowly she turned. He stood just a few feet away, still in his perfectly tailored wedding suit, the image of control, except for the tightness in his jaw, the way his fingers curled at his sides. His eyes, dark and unreadable, locked onto hers. "You need to come back inside," he said, taking a slow step forward. Naomi's fingers tightened around the door handle. No. His expression flickered, something dangerous flashing across it before he smoothed it away. "Don't be dramatic," he said lightly. "It's been a long day. You're overwhelmed. Let's go upstairs, talk about this in private." Naomi shook her head. "I heard you." Her voice wavered slightly, but she lifted her chin, forcing herself to stay steady. "I heard everything you said to your mother." Damien exhaled sharply through his nose, tilting his head. "You're misunderstanding." "No," she cut him off. "I'm not." Something in his posture shifted. "You can't just leave," he said, softer this time, almost coaxing. "You're my wife now." The word sent ice through her veins. His wife, not his partner, not his equal, his possession. Naomi's stomach twisted. "I'm not your anything," she said, her voice harder now, stronger. Damien's expression darkened, and then he moved. Fast, too fast. Before Naomi could react, he was in front of her, his hand grabbing her wrist with just enough pressure to make her gasp. "You're not thinking clearly," he said, his voice still smooth, but there was something underneath it now, something unraveling. "You're making a scene, Naomi. You don't want that, do you?" Her pulse pounded, panic clawing at her chest, but she forced herself to keep her voice even. "You're hurting me," she said. The words had an immediate effect. Damien's grip loosened, just slightly, but he didn't let go. His eyes flickered toward the ballroom doors, as if remembering that they weren't alone, that the people inside could walk out at any moment. And Naomi realized something then. He wasn't afraid of losing her. He was afraid of people seeing him lose control. That was his weakness. Not love, not regret. His image. So, Naomi made a decision. She met his gaze, steady and unflinching. Then, loud enough for anyone nearby to hear, "Let go of me." Damien's entire body stiffened. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, slowly, deliberately, he released her wrist. Naomi took a step back, her breath unsteady, but her stance firm. "We're done," she said, her voice carrying through the hallway. Damien said nothing. He just stared at her. And then, just as the ballroom doors creaked open behind them, Vivian stepping out, her sharp eyes locking onto the scene. Damien exhaled and took a step back, his expression smoothing into something cold. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice so low it sent a chill through Naomi's bones. But she didn't hesitate. She turned, pushed open the door, and walked out into the night. The cold air hit her full force, the sound of distant traffic, the rustling of the trees. The world outside felt so different from the one she had just left, as if she had stepped from one reality into another. Her feet moved automatically, her body running on adrenaline, barely aware of anything except the desperate need to put distance between herself and the estate. She reached for her phone, her fingers trembling, and dialed the only number that mattered. Layla picked up on the first ring. "Naomi? I need you to pick me up," Naomi said, her breath hitching. "Now." There was no hesitation. "Where are you?" Naomi glanced around, trying to ground herself. "The east side of the estate, near the garden exit. I'm on my way." The line went dead. Naomi exhaled shakily, gripping the phone tight. She was almost free. But as she turned toward the driveway, a shadow moved at the corner of her vision. She barely had time to react before a hand clamped around her arm. A scream caught in her throat as she spun, expecting Damien. But it wasn't him. It was one of the security guards. "You need to come back inside, ma'am," the man said, his grip firm but not painful. "Mr. Hargrove insists." "I don't care," Naomi snapped, yanking her arm away. "Let go of me." The guard hesitated. And then, tires screeched. A car pulled up fast, its headlights cutting through the night. "Layla." The passenger door flew open and Layla's voice rang out. "Get in!" Naomi didn't think. She ran. The guard moved as if to stop her, but Layla's car jerked forward, forcing him back. Naomi threw herself into the seat, slamming the door just as Layla hit the gas. The estate blurred past them. Naomi didn't breathe, didn't move, until the gates disappeared in the rearview mirror. Only then did the tension snap inside her. A sob broke from her chest. Layla reached over, gripping her hand tight. "You're okay," she said. "You're out." But Naomi wasn't sure if that was true. Because even as they drove away, even as the estate faded into the distance, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Not yet. Naomi's breath came in ragged gasps as Layla's car sped down the darkened streets, the estate shrinking in the distance behind them. Her hands shook in her lap, her wedding dress bunched between her fingers, the fabric now feeling more like a noose than a symbol of love. She pressed her back against the seat, as if trying to disappear into it, as if that could erase the past few hours. Leela was silent as she drove, her knuckles white against the steering wheel, her eyes flicking between the road and Naomi. The tension between them was thick, heavy with the weight of what had just happened. "You're safe," Layla said finally, her voice quiet but firm. "He can't touch you now." Naomi swallowed hard, staring out the window. The lights of the city blurred past her, smearing into streaks of gold and red. Could she really believe that? That Damien would let her go that easily? The shattered glass, the way his fingers had tightened around her wrist, the way his mother had looked at her like she was an inconvenience that needed to be removed. No, this wasn't over. Layla pulled into the parking lot of her apartment complex, shutting off the engine with a sharp twist of her wrist. "Come on," she said, climbing out. Naomi hesitated before following. The moment she stepped out, the night air hit her, cool and sharp, carrying the distant hum of the city. It smelled different than the estate, less refined, less controlled. It smelled real. Inside, the apartment was small but warm, dimly lit by the glow of the streetlights filtering through the blinds. It was nothing like the cold, towering halls of the Hargrove estate. Layla locked the door behind them, double-checking the deadbolt before turning to Naomi. "Sit," she ordered. Naomi collapsed onto the couch, her entire body feeling like it had been wrung out. Layla disappeared into the kitchen, returning moments later with a glass of whiskey. "Drink," she said, shoving it into Naomi's hands. Naomi took a small sip, the burn sliding down her throat, grounding her. She let out a slow breath. Leela sat across from her, watching her carefully. "You want to tell me what the hell happened back there?" Naomi shook her head, staring into the amber liquid. "I don't even know where to start." Layla leaned forward, her elbows on her knees. "Start with the part where your brand new husband threw a goddamned glass across the room." Naomi flinched, the memory flashing through her mind. The way the shards had skittered across the floor, the stunned silence of the crowd. The way Damien had looked at her, his face dark with something she hadn't recognized before, something terrifying. She took another sip. "He changed, Layla," she whispered. "Or maybe I never really knew him at all." Layla's jaw clenched. "I knew something was off about him," she muttered. "But I didn't think—" She exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over her face. "I should have made you listen." Naomi let out a humorless laugh. "Wouldn't have mattered. I wouldn't have believed you." Silence stretched between them. Naomi could feel the weight of everything she had just walked away from pressing down on her. The Hargroves weren't the kind of family that accepted defiance. Damien wasn't the kind of man who accepted rejection. She reached for her phone, hesitating before turning it back on. The screen lit up, the notifications flooding in immediately. "Damien, baby, please come back. Let's talk. I was upset, but we can fix this." "Damien, Naomi, don't do this. You're my wife. This isn't how we handle things." "Damien, you're making this worse than it has to be. Answer me." "Damien, where are you?" "Damien." "Naomi, come home." "Damien, you are my wife. You are not leaving me." Her stomach twisted. Then another message. This one different. "Unknown number. You think you can just walk away? That's not how this works." A chill ran through her. She didn't need to guess who it was from. Vivian. Layla must have seen the change in her expression because she snatched the phone out of Naomi's hands before she could react. She scrolled through the messages, her face darkening. "Nope, absolutely not. We're saving all of these." Naomi swallowed hard, gripping the couch cushion. "He's not going to let me go." Layla nodded grimly. "Then we make sure he doesn't have a choice." She got up, pacing the room before grabbing her own phone. First thing tomorrow, we go to the police. We get a restraining order. Naomi hesitated. Do you think that'll stop him? Layla's eyes met hers, fierce and determined. Maybe not, but it's a start. Naomi exhaled shakily. A start. She could work with that. She barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Damien's face, the way his expression had shifted from charming to something else entirely. She kept hearing Vivian's voice, smooth and calculated. You need to make sure of it. Morning came too soon. By the time they arrived at the police station, Naomi felt like she was running on fumes. The officer who took her statement was a woman in her mid-40s, her expression unreadable as Naomi recounted everything. The messages, the threats, the way Damien had grabbed her, the way his mother had been pulling the strings. When Naomi finished, the officer tapped her fingers against the desk. This isn't something we take lightly, she said. We'll start the paperwork for a restraining order immediately. Naomi nodded, though it didn't feel like enough. The officer leaned forward. Do you have somewhere safe to stay? She's staying with me, Leela said before Naomi could answer. The officer nodded. Good, but I'd recommend letting your neighbors know, locking your doors and keeping an eye out. If anything escalates, call us immediately. Naomi exhaled, the weight in her chest lifting slightly. It wasn't a solution, but it was something. When they stepped out of the station, Layla turned to her. Now what? Naomi stared out at the street, watching people pass by, going about their lives like nothing had changed. Except everything had changed. She wasn't just Naomi Carter anymore. She was Naomi Carter Hargrove, and she had just declared war on a family that didn't lose. She turned to Layla, her hands tightening into fists. Now, she said. Now, we fight back. Naomi sat on Leela's couch, staring at the glow of her phone screen as another notification appeared. Her chest tightened. Another message. Another attempt. Dammy, you can't just disappear. You are my wife. This is not over. She gritted her teeth, gripping the phone so tightly her fingers ached. This was the fourth message today. The first had been apologetic, the second manipulative, the third outright angry, and now this. A warning. A promise that he wasn't letting go. Her stomach twisted. It wasn't just Damien. Vivian had tried too. First a call, then a text. Vivian. Let's be adults about this, Naomi. Come back and handle this the right way. She could almost hear the condescension in her voice, the carefully disguised threat beneath her words. Naomi had ignored them all, but she knew ignoring them wouldn't be enough. They weren't going to stop. She glanced at the time. Nearly noon. Layla had left for work, but not before reminding Naomi to lock the doors and keep the blinds closed. You need to lay low until the restraining order goes through, she'd said, her tone serious. Stay inside. Don't go anywhere alone. Naomi had nodded, promising she'd be careful. But sitting here, trapped in a borrowed apartment, waiting for something to happen, it made her skin crawl. She wasn't going to let them dictate her life, not anymore. Her phone buzzed again, but this time, it wasn't Damien. It was her lawyer. She exhaled sharply before answering. Hello? We have a court date, the lawyer said without preamble. I've filed for an emergency restraining order. We should have an answer in the next 48 hours. Relief flooded through her, but it was short-lived. Because, then the lawyer added, but there's something else. You should see this. A pause. Turn on the news." Naomi frowned. "What?" "Just turn it on." Her pulse spiked as she grabbed the remote and flipped through the channels until she landed on a familiar news station. And there it was. Her wedding. A grainy, shaky video of Damien throwing the champagne glass across the ballroom, shards of glass exploding against the marble floor. Gasps from the crowd. Naomi's stunned expression, the way she turned and walked away, back straight, chin lifted. The headline at the bottom of the screen made her stomach drop. "Billionaire heir's wedding erupts in chaos. What really happened?" Her mouth went dry. The anchor spoke in that practiced, professional tone, but the words made her blood run cold. Sources close to the Hargrove family claim the bride overreacted to a simple disagreement, abandoning her husband in a moment of stress, but others at the event suggest there may have been a deeper issue between the couple. Guests report tensions leading up to the wedding, and while no formal statement has been made, speculation continues to grow. Naomi's vision blurred. Speculation? They were already twisting the story, already planting seeds of doubt. Her hands trembled as she muted the TV. She shouldn't have been surprised. Of course, Damien and his family wouldn't just let this go. They had power, influence, and they were using it, turning her into the villain. She gritted her teeth. No, she wasn't going to let them rewrite her story. She grabbed her phone and texted Layla. "Naomi, turn on the news." "Layla, already saw it. Are you okay?" "Naomi, no. I need to fight back." A few seconds later, her phone rang. "You're right," Leela said immediately. "They're controlling the narrative. They're making it look like you're just a hysterical woman who ran away." Naomi swallowed hard. "I can't let them do this." "Then don't." Leela's words settled in her chest, heavy but solid, and Naomi made a decision. She opened her social media and, for the first time since the wedding, she typed out a post. She didn't overthink it. She didn't let fear dictate her words. She simply told the truth. "A lot of people are asking what happened at my wedding. Here's the truth. I left because I was in danger. I left because I saw the man I was supposed to spend my life with reveal who he really was. I left because staying would have meant losing myself. No one should have to justify walking away from a situation that makes them feel unsafe. This is my story, and I won't let anyone else tell it for me." She hit post before she could hesitate. Almost immediately, notifications flooded in. The comments started rolling in. "Good for you. I knew something felt off about him. Stay safe. You did the right thing. But then, you're exaggerating. So dramatic. A man can't be angry now. Gold digger." Naomi expected it. The backlash. The doubt. But she also saw the messages from other women. Women who had been in her position. Women who had stayed too long. Women who had barely escaped. And she knew she had done the right thing. That night, she locked every door, checked every window twice, and curled up on the couch, her phone gripped tightly in her hands. She was exhausted. But she wasn't running anymore. She was standing her ground. And she was ready for whatever came next. Naomi stood on the balcony of her new apartment, gripping a cup of steaming coffee as the early morning sun painted the sky in soft hues of pink and gold. The air smelled of rain from the storm that had passed the night before, fresh and new, like a beginning. She closed her eyes, inhaling deeply, letting the weight of everything settle. It had been 3 months since she had walked away from Damien. 3 months since she had stood in that ballroom, staring at the man she thought she knew, only to realize he had never really been hers. 3 months since she had reclaimed her life. But even with the distance, even with the restraining order finalized and the divorce proceedings in motion, she still wasn't free. Not completely. She turned at the sound of her phone buzzing on the kitchen counter. A message from Leela. Leela, guess what? Damien's engaged. Naomi's stomach twisted, but not with pain, not with regret, with pity. She had expected this. Damien couldn't be alone for long. He needed control, needed someone to mold into whatever image his family expected. She knew that whoever this woman was, she didn't know the truth yet. Leela sent another message. Layla, don't worry. I sent her the video. Naomi let out a sharp breath, half a laugh, half disbelief. Of course Layla had. Of course she had made sure Damien's new fiancé knew exactly what she was walking into. A part of Naomi wanted to warn her too, to reach out. But she knew better. She knew that nothing would make a difference unless the woman chose to see it herself. Just like Naomi had to. She placed the phone down, staring at it for a long moment, before making a decision. She wasn't going to waste another second thinking about Damien. This was her new life, and she was going to live it. She turned toward her desk, where an open journal sat waiting. It was the one her mother had given her before the wedding, the one she had been too afraid to write in back then. Now she picked up a pen and let the words flow. 6 months ago I thought my life was over. Today I know it was just beginning. I walked away from a man who tried to break me. I rebuilt myself from the ground up. I'm not a victim. I'm not just a survivor. I'm me. Stronger, wiser, and finally free. She closed the journal, smiling to herself. This was only the beginning. Thank you for staying until the end of the story. Your time and attention mean more than words can express. This story isn't just about Naomi. It's about strength, about knowing when to walk away, and about reclaiming your power when the world tries to take it from you. It's a reminder that love should never come at the cost of your safety, your dignity, or your sense of self. No matter how much history you share with someone, no matter what promises were made, the moment you feel trapped, unheard, or controlled, you have every right to leave. This isn't just Naomi's fight. It's a fight so many people face. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to choose between staying in something comfortable but damaging, or stepping into the unknown for the sake of your own survival, know that you are not alone. You are stronger than you think. Where are you watching from? I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Let's start a conversation. And if you want more stories like this, stories that challenge, inspire, and reveal hidden truths, don't forget to subscribe. More powerful stories are on the way. Until next time, stay strong, stay safe, and never forget your worth.